Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not special. You're not noble or chosen, or particularly bright. You're just a dirt-caked peasant child in the year 1212, which is a long way of saying you're disposable. You don't know what a crusade is. You barely know what Jerusalem is. But some barefoot boy with a vision and a very loud voice said, God wants you to go there. And frankly, that sounds better than staying in your famine-wrecked village another winter. So you pack a crust of bread, mutter a prayer, and follow the crowd. No map, no supplies, no plan. Just a few thousand other kids, all equally underfed and overpromised. And together, you march towards salvation. Or something like it. You won't be seeing home again. So before you lose your last baby tooth to malnutrition and start arguing over whether mud counts as food, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always enjoy knowing who else is still awake while we unravel another beautifully dumb chapter of human suffering. If you'd like early access to more slow-burning historical catastrophes, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Now lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin. You've never seen a map. You wouldn't know how to read one even if you had. The farthest you've ever gone is maybe the next village, and only then because the cows wandered off again, and no one else felt like chasing them. You were born in a thatched roof mudhole somewhere in France or Germany. The place doesn't really matter, and you've spent most of your short, damp life watching people die of things no one bothers naming. You have two shirts. One of them is lice, the other is fleas. Your parents are either in the ground or too busy coughing up their lungs to notice you're starving. You're not special. You're not cursed. You're just poor and hungry, always hungry. Most days you wake up to the smell of someone else's breath and someone else's piss. If there's bread, you chew it slowly. If there isn't, you chew whatever's next to your hand and try not to cry about it. You know what hunger is, not the kind the nobles joke about at Lent. You've seen your neighbours boil grass, fight dogs, and gnaw the bones of the dead. You're 11, maybe 12. You don't keep track anymore. It's easier that way when your friends stop waking up. And then he arrives. You don't know his name at first. He's just a boy, not much older than you, dirty like everyone else. But when he talks, people listen, not because he shouts, though he does sometimes when the crowd gets noisy, but because he talks like he's already sure. That alone makes him a prophet around here. Everyone else stammers and guesses. This boy? He points to the sky like he's been there. He says God spoke to him, that Christ appeared in a dream, that he's been chosen to lead a great army, not with swords or horses, but with faith. Children will reclaim the Holy Land, he says. No blood, no violence, the sea will part, and they'll walk to Jerusalem on dry sand. You don't know what most of that means. But the people around you start weeping. They nod. They cross themselves. One woman faints. A man you've seen steal chickens drops to his knees and swears he's going. And just like that, the boy becomes more than a boy. He becomes the answer. You don't have much to believe in. The local priest mostly collects taxes and smells like goat. The nobility might as well be dragons for how real they are. But this boy looks like you, starves like you, hurts like you. And now he's saying you're important, that you can change the world, that your suffering isn't pointless. It's part of God's plan. You want that to be true more than anything. Maybe you follow him because you're desperate. Maybe because everyone else is going and you're scared to stay behind. Maybe because the idea of walking to Jerusalem sounds easier than surviving another winter in your own skin. Whatever the reason, you tell yourself it's a holy mission. You whisper the word crusade under your breath, like it means something more than walking until your feet rot. There are others like you, dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands. Dirty-faced boys and sunken-eyed girls, hobbling behind him in a long, patchwork column of faith and bad decisions. Some of them carry crudely carved crosses. Some carry relics, animal bones, rag scraps, anything that might have once touched a saint. Most carry nothing. There's nothing left to bring. Adults sometimes walk alongside you, but not for long. The truly old and the truly wise turn back early, or they never come at all. The ones who stay are the ones too broken to know better, the mad, the blind, the pious beyond reason, and of course the ones looking to take advantage, traders, preachers, thieves who have learned how to pray while they pick pockets. The boy keeps shouting, keeps smiling, keeps pointing ahead, like he knows where this is going. You think he believes it. That's the worst part. You think he really believes the sea will split, and the sand will be warm, and the people in Jerusalem will open their arms and not their gates. You don't know yet that he'll vanish before any of that happens. You don't know yet that no one will stop this thing once it starts. That you're marching straight into nothing. Your mother tells you to go, or maybe she just doesn't stop you. Either way, she watches as you leave. You wave just in case that matters. But her eyes don't follow you for long, and then you're gone. The dust swallows your footsteps before you're even out of town. The plan, if you can even call it that, is simple. You walk to the sea parts. You stroll across the exposed seafloor like it's just another country road. And on the other side, Jerusalem. That's it. No boats, no armies, no money. Just water that gets out of your way because God likes the look of your grubby little feet. You've never seen the sea, but you're pretty sure it knows who's in charge. You've been told it once parted for Moses, and you're a child too, just like him probably. So why not again? Word spreads fast. Faster than food, faster than sense. Some say the boy in charge is a prophet. Others say he's a shepherd, or a mystic, or a fraud. No one agrees, but that doesn't really matter. You're not following a resume, you're following a story. One that sounds better than anything else on offer. The boy you follow might be Stephen of Cloyes, a shepherd from northern France, who claims Jesus handed him a letter. Not metaphorically, literally. Handed him a note like a medieval pen pal. He couldn't read it, of course, but the local monks said it looked very holy, and that's apparently enough. Or maybe you're with the Germans, following Nicholas of Cologne, who says he's received divine instructions too, though the details change depending on who's asking. He's more organised than Stephen, a little older, a little louder. People say he can perform miracles, mostly things like getting large crowds to keep walking without stabbing each other, which frankly feels like a miracle in itself. His version of the story is just as absurd. March south, reach the sea, walk to Jerusalem, and free the Holy Land without bloodshed. A peaceful army made up entirely of children, because nothing says tactical advantage like starvation, smallpox, and high-pitched voices. It's worth noting that none of this is sanctioned by the church. The Pope didn't ask for this. No bishop is handing out travel money. This isn't one of those big, shiny, armoured crusades with banners and horses and papal blessings. No, this is something different. Something purer, they say, which is another word for completely unsupported. You're told that adults have failed, that only the innocence of children can succeed where emperors have lost. You're also told that Jerusalem will open its gates at the sight of your innocence. No one explains why armed Muslims in fortified cities would be particularly moved by lice-ridden peasant children. But no one really wants to ask. The numbers swell. From dozens to hundreds, then thousands. Children leave their homes with the clothes on their backs, convinced they're part of something divine. Some bring food, most don't. A few bring pets or scraps of scripture they can't read, or handmade crosses carved from fence posts. They walk barefoot on stone roads. They sleep in fields. They sing hymns for now, though those will fade when the hunger gets louder than the faith. Adults join too, some pious, some predatory, some just too poor, or broken to care where the road ends. You notice early on that no one has a map. No one's quite sure which direction Jerusalem actually is. The leaders keep pointing vaguely southeast, as though that's enough. You cross rivers without bridges, climb hills without trails, and pray at shrines to saints you've never heard of, because someone said it was the thing to do. The journey isn't marked by progress so much as repetition. Another village, another speech, another night under the stars surrounded by coughing and whispered prayers. The older boys start getting ideas. Some say maybe they'll take up swords when they get to Jerusalem. Others whisper about finding treasure along the way, gold, relics, proof of God's favour. No one seems to know what happens if the sea doesn't part. It's treated like a detail, like worrying about rain when you're planning a bonfire. It will part, they say, because it has to. Because if it doesn't, then this whole thing is just a death march wearing a halo. You'd be amazed how far a crowd can move without a single coherent thought. Town after town watches you pass, eyes wide, mouths half open. Some locals cry, others jeer. A few try to give you bread. Most just lock their doors, and thank God their own children are still home. The priests don't intervene. The nobles don't stop you. Maybe they're too stunned. Maybe they're just relieved you're someone else's problem now. You don't know how many of you there are anymore. 5,000? 10? More? No one's counting. And if they were, they'd lose track fast. Children vanish. Some slip away in the night. Some are taken. Some fall behind and never catch up. But the group keeps growing, like a snowball rolling downhill, except the snow is disease and the hill is paved with bones. Every step you take is rooted in the same belief, that the sea will split, that God is waiting, that this suffering has a destination. It doesn't matter that no one's ever seen it happen. It doesn't matter that there are no boats, no soldiers, no logistics, no plan. Faith doesn't need facts. It just needs forward motion. So you keep walking, and you don't ask questions, because if you do, the whole thing might stop making sense. And you need it to make sense. You need it to mean something. Otherwise, you're just a hungry child walking toward a very large body of water that absolutely isn't going anywhere. You haven't even made it out of the next province, and already your feet look like they've been left to ferment. The skin is splitting around your heels, raw and flaking like old bark. Blisters swell along your toes, fill with yellow fluid, and burst in your shoes. If you were lucky enough to start with shoes. Most kids weren't. Those who did have long since worn them to shreds. The leather peeling away, with each mile like paper in the rain. So you walk barefoot now, on stone, on gravel, through puddles that don't smell like water and mud, that feels suspiciously warm. The road isn't a road exactly. It's a trail of pressed down earth, shaped more by livestock and old carts than by any kind of planning. It floods when it rains, cracks when it doesn't, and is occasionally so narrow that hundreds of you are forced to stumble single file between ditches. And the smell follows you, not a smell you can name, just the general stench of too many unwashed bodies moving in one direction. Sweat, rot, feces, mould, blood, and something else, something sweet and wrong, that no one wants to talk about. You sleep wherever the sun gives up, sometimes in open fields, sometimes under trees, sometimes huddled beside barns, if the locals don't chase you off with sticks. There are no tents, no shelters, just wool cloaks that stopped being waterproof 3 storms ago, and bodies pressed close together for warmth. You try to find someone quieter to sleep beside, someone who doesn't scream or shiver or mumble prayers all night. But it's a gamble. You've already shared space with a sleep kicker, a bedwetter, and one boy who died in his sleep and didn't get noticed until morning. The food is getting worse. Whatever scraps were packed at the beginning, bread, dried beans, questionable cheese, are long gone. Now you eat what you find. Roots if you're lucky, half-rotted vegetables from a market's trash heap, fungal things someone swears are edible. Once a bird fell from the sky, and 24 children fought over it like wild dogs. You didn't win. Someone else walked away with the head and a wing. You got a feather and a lesson in crowd control. And then there's the water. It's everywhere, except where you need it to be. You drink from streams, ponds, anything that looks like it might not kill you immediately. Of course it does, or something in it does. Within days, the line of children starts to slow. crippled not by soldiers or saboteurs, but by dysentery. You learn to recognize the signs fast. The cramping, the sweating, the sudden sprint into the bushes, followed by the unmistakable sound of liquid suffering. It doesn't kill everyone, just the ones who are already too weak to walk, which, increasingly, is most of you. Hygiene, if it ever existed in your village, is now fully extinct. There are no baths, no soap. You're lucky if you find a stream to splash mud off your face once every few days. Lice are constant. Fleas are worse. You itch until your skin bleeds, and then you scratch again because bleeding is better than crawling. Someone tells you to rub garlic on the bites. Someone else says garlic wards off the devil. Either way, there's no garlic, so the conversation ends quickly. You start to notice how everyone looks smaller. Not just thinner, smaller. Like the hunger is compressing you, making you fold inward. Kids who used to joke and sing are now quiet, glassy-eyed. The older ones carry sticks, not as weapons, but as walking aids. They lean on them like old men, hunched from fatigue, spines bowed under the weight of their faith and their own ribs. You pass another village. The adults watch you like you're already ghosts. Some of the children collapse, not dramatically, just sort of stop. Mid-step, mid-thought, mid-whatever. Their bodies sag to the ground like bags of grain, and no one rushes to help. Not anymore. At the beginning, people would cry out, try to lift them, call for water, say a prayer. Now they just step around. You do too. You tell yourself you'll look back, maybe say a few words. But you never do. You don't even remember their names. The boy still leads, somewhere near the front. You don't see him often anymore. The crowd has gotten too big, too disorganized. Rumours swirl that he's riding in a cart or being protected by a group of older boys who won't let anyone close. Maybe he's still smiling. Maybe he's just tired, like the rest of you. The worst part isn't the pain, it's the sameness. Every day is another march through filth and fever, another night of shivering beside strangers, another morning of counting the living and pretending not to count the dead. You don't know how far you've gone. You don't know how far you have left. You just walk. Because that's what everyone else is doing. Because the sea is waiting. Because you've already come too far to turn around. And because if you stop now, you might have to admit this isn't a crusade. It's a slow, shuffling funeral procession. And you're in it. At first it feels almost noble. The way people pass crusts of bread around the fire, or hand out water with both hands like it's communion wine. One boy splits his last onion 3 ways. A girl offers her blanket to someone coughing too hard to sleep. You see children pray together, sing together, cry together, and it feels like something holy, like maybe this whole crusade idea was more than fevered nonsense after all. That lasts a week. Then the food runs out, not in a dramatic thunderclap kind of way. It just dwindles. Bit by bit, the handouts get smaller. The pots go emptier. The space between meals grows longer. Eventually, the question shifts from what's for dinner to what's still edible. Mouldy cheese, sure. Rotting carrots, why not? A strip of leather from your sandal boiled in ditch water. Sounds like a banquet if you squint hard enough. At some point, someone finds a dead bird flattened in the road and decides that feathers can be picked off. The sharing stops, but the hunger doesn't. It just grows louder, sharper, less polite. You catch children staring too long at each other's satchels. You start sleeping, with your scraps hidden in your clothes. You eat quickly now, even when the food burns your throat or makes you gag. You've learned that the first bite always tastes better than the last, especially if someone's watching. And someone is always watching. You hear the fights before you see them. At first it's just shoving. A snapped twig over who stepped in whose space. A fist over a dropped crust. Then it escalates. Boys dragging each other down by the hair, scrambling over a half-rotten apple that bounced out of someone's bag. Screaming, biting, blood. No one breaks them up anymore. Not unless food is involved. Then a few older kids jump in. Not to restore order, but to steal whatever started the fight in the first place. Somewhere along the way, The older boys stop pretending they're part of the group. They form their own cluster, stronger, meaner, better fed. You don't know where they get their food, but you have a few guesses. You've seen them knock over younger kids, tear open bags, strip away cloaks and belts that might be hiding something edible. No one stops them. Even the ones who claim to follow the preacher avoid their eyes now. It's not cowardice, it's conservation. Righteousness takes energy, and no one has any to spare. You remember when this was supposed to be about God, about innocence and salvation. You remember the speeches, the sermons, the tearful parents sending their children off like lambs to the slaughter, with the emphasis, supposedly, on lambs, not slaughter. You remember hearing that the Holy Land would welcome you with open arms, that angels would walk beside you, that faith would be your armour, and the sea would open like a door. Instead, your armour is a crust of dirt, and your weapon is a sharpened stick you sleep with under your shirt. Instead of miracles, you get worms. Instead of angels, you get a boy twice your size threatening to cave in your skull if you don't hand over your last handful of barley. And the sea, as far as anyone knows, is still water, still waiting, still very much intact. At some point you see someone eat a rat, not a cooked rat, not even a clean rat. Just a stiff, half-crushed thing with its tail still twitching, scraped off the side of the road. No one laughs, no one cries. Someone mutters, "Lucky bastard," and keeps walking. You try not to look hungry while you pretend to feel disgusted. You learn to recognise desperation, the way hands shake before they grab, the way eyes flick back and forth like cornered animals. You start walking in the middle of the group, not at the edges where you're easy to peel off. You try to look sick enough to be worthless, but not so sick that someone thinks you won't notice a hand in your pack. It's a balancing act between appearing too weak to steal from and too alert to attack. The best performers survive longest. No one sings anymore. The prayers, if you hear them at all, are muttered like apologies. You notice fewer people talking about Jerusalem. Fewer still talking about the preacher boy. The only time anyone mentions Jesus now is sarcastically, usually after someone gets punched over a beet or shoved face first into a puddle. Very Christ-like, someone mutters. Bet he'd be proud. A few people still cross themselves afterward, just in case. You don't bother. You figure if God was watching, he's walked away by now. You've started to think about food in ways that make you uncomfortable. Not just what you'd eat if you could, bread, meat, warm broth, but who you'd take it from, what you'd do to get it. You haven't acted on any of those thoughts yet, but you've stopped judging the ones who have. At this point, morality feels like a luxury, like clean water or sleep without nightmares or boots that don't bleed. You still call it a crusade, mostly out of habit, but deep down, you know it's not. Not anymore. It's a slow, grinding exodus of children slowly eating each other alive. And you're one of them. And you're still walking. You still pray. Not because you believe it will help, but because you don't know what else to do with your hands when they're not shaking. You whisper to the sky at night, curled up in wet grass, half hoping someone might answer. But no one ever does. Not in any way that matters. The only thing you get back is wind. Sometimes thunder. Once, the sound of someone vomiting nearby and calling it a demon. It's not, it's dysentery. Again. As the days stretch and the hunger sharpens, the group gets louder. Not in conversation, those are rare now, but in prayer. Hymns sung with cracked voices, shouted verses from half-remembered psalms, frantic declarations that God is listening if you just scream a little harder. A girl throws herself to the ground and sobs for an hour straight. A boy walks barefoot over thorns to prove he's worthy of divine notice. Another lad starts beating himself across the back with a thorn branch over and over until someone calls him a saint. You watch him bleed and wonder if that's the bar now. Bleed enough and maybe heaven squints in your direction. Children start to claim visions. One says she saw the Virgin Mary in the clouds. Another swears an angel whispered a prophecy while he slept beside a ditch. A third claims a bright light entered her chest and made her heart glow with the love of God, though it might have just been fever. The line between spiritual ecstasy and septic delirium has grown thin, and you're starting to suspect most of the so-called holy experiences could be cured with clean water and a decent meal. You don't speak up. You've learned by now that skepticism is unwelcome. Faith is the only thing anyone has left, and they're gripping it like a drowning man holds onto driftwood, even if it's splintering in their hands, even if it's taking on water, even if it never floats. In the first place, you want to believe too that this means something, that someone is watching, that you're not just a gaggle of starving children slowly decomposing on a dirt road to nowhere. A few adults still travel with you. Some are genuinely devout. They encourage the visions, call them blessings, say you're all part of a great spiritual awakening. One priest, self-appointed most likely, starts keeping track of the miracles. He counts every vision, every recovery, every vague coincidence as divine proof. One day, a boy finds a loaf of bread half buried in the mud. The priest declares it a gift from heaven. You saw the same boy hide it there that morning. You say nothing. Another time, a child nearly drowns crossing a swollen stream. He emerges coughing, half-conscious, and the priest says he was reborn through holy trial. You're not sure if that counts as a miracle or just plain survival. But either way, the boy's dead by the end of the week. No one updates the tally. Some of the faithful begin fasting, voluntarily, as if you weren't already starving by accident. They say the hunger is holy, that suffering purifies, that the body is a prison and the spirit must be freed. A girl collapses during one of these fasts and dies with a smile on her face. The priest says she's in heaven. You suspect she'd rather have stayed here, maybe just long enough to taste something warm again. You're not against faith exactly. It's just hard to take seriously when the ones shouting loudest are usually the ones with food hidden in their cloaks. You've watched more than one visionary sneak into someone's pack after a rousing sermon. You've seen the priest turn his eyes away when the strong take from the weak. You've heard him talk about divine justice and then ignore a boy bleeding from the mouth because he's not one of the chosen. You start to realize that this journey isn't about God. It's about control. And the easiest way to control hungry people is to promise them something better after they die. The official church says nothing. No letters, no messengers, no attempt to stop the march or redirect it or explain that this isn't what anyone asked for. Maybe they're watching from a safe distance. Maybe they're just pretending you don't exist. Either way, no one's riding in on a white horse with clean blankets and soup. The Pope might mention you later in passing, a misguided enthusiasm perhaps, but for now, you're just a rumour on the wind. A problem no one wants to claim, and so you keep walking, surrounded by the sound of desperate prayers and half-believed miracles. You step over another child, kneeling in the dirt, muttering Latin he doesn't understand. He looks up at you with wide eyes and says the saints are coming. You nod. You don't have the heart to tell him they're not. They never were. The boy next to you dies in his sleep. You're not sure when it happens. Maybe sometime in the night, maybe right before dawn. 1 minute he's there, curled up like everyone else, breathing too loudly. The next, he's just a shape in the grass that doesn't get up when the rest of you do. His eyes are open, but there's nothing behind them. You look at him for a moment, not because you're surprised, but because you're waiting to see if anyone else will react. They don't. One kid steps over him, another kicks him lightly, just to be sure, then keeps walking. No prayer, no name, no pause, just another warm body, turned cold. Weeks have passed. By now, death is a background noise, like coughing, like hunger. You don't scream when someone dies, you don't even flinch. You just adjust your stride. There are so many of you, and so many of you not staying upright, that it's easier to stop keeping track. You forget names quickly. You forget faces faster. What was once Thomas from Rouen becomes that one who wheezed, then just him, then not even that. You walk past a corpse and it barely registers. Flies do more mourning than you do. At first there were efforts to bury the dead. Small ones, quick ones, a few shallow graves scraped out with sticks and fingernails. But as the bodies piled up, the motivation thinned out. You stop digging when you realise you'll never finish. The ground is too hard in some places, too wet in others. You've seen a boy spend an hour trying to bury a friend, only to collapse beside the half-covered body. Someone else tossed both of them into a ditch. That's the closest thing to a funeral you've seen in days. And then there's the smell. It clings to everything. Clothing, hair, hands, air. A thick, greasy stench that rides in your nostrils like a parasite. It's not just one odour, it's a layered thing. Sweat, urine, old wounds, unwashed skin, wet leather, blood, spoiled food, and beneath it all, the rotting meat of bodies left too long under the sun. You pass corpses half submerged in streams, slumped beside hedgerows, curled under trees like they just stopped to nap. They don't even look human after a while, just twisted, swollen things swarming with flies. The flies are constant, black clouds of them that rise and fall with each body. They get in your mouth when you talk, in your ears when you sleep. You wake up with them nesting in your eyelashes. There's no escaping them. They're as much a part of the crusade as the walking. You've seen children try to chase them off with branches or screams, but it never works. All it does is waste energy, and energy is more precious than hope. Disease moves faster than prayer. Dysentery is the most common. It hits hard, hits fast, and doesn't let go. You can tell who has it by the sudden paleness, the cramps, the desperate waddle to the edge of the path. It doesn't take long before you start to see them crawling instead of walking, then lying still. Others develop fevers, strange rashes, coughs that never stop. One girl's fingers turned black before the rest of her gave out. A boy's teeth fell out in clumps while he muttered something about seeing angels. You learn not to touch anyone, unless you have to. There are no doctors, no medicine, no remedies beyond superstition and prayer. Some kids chew bark, others tie charms around their necks, scraps of cloth with saints' names scrawled in them by someone who claimed to be literate. You see a few still trying leeches, as if draining more blood might be the solution. Spoiler, it isn't. But no one wants to be the one who admits there's nothing left to try. You develop tricks to avoid getting too attached. You stop learning names unless someone survives longer than a week. You don't ask where someone's from. You don't share your food with anyone who looks like they're too sick to make it another mile. You tell yourself you're being practical. You tell yourself this is what survival looks like. But deep down, you know it's just cowardice. You're scared of seeing one more pair of eyes go dull. It's easier if they were never anything more than him or her. Every once in a while, someone breaks. A scream, a sob, a whispered name repeated until it becomes meaningless. But those moments are rare. Most of you just keep walking because stopping feels more dangerous than anything else. You convince yourself that if you just move fast enough, far enough, long enough, the dying might fall behind. They don't. They're always there, beside you, in front of you, inside you. You've lost count. Of the dead, of the days, of the places you've passed, of the faces you've forgotten. The crusade has become something else now. Not a journey, not a pilgrimage, just a slow withering line of children measuring distance in corpses. And still you walk, because what else is there to do? By now, you've stopped thinking of yourself as a pilgrim. You're not part of a crusade anymore. You're part of a problem. A moving, starving, increasingly diseased problem that's impossible to ignore and harder to stomach. You haven't seen a full meal in over a month. Towns see you coming long before you arrive. Your smell travels faster than your feet do, and they react the way any sane medieval village would when faced with thousands of filthy, wide-eyed children shouting about divine visions. They bolt their doors, hide their food, and hope you'll go away. You usually don't. You knock anyway. Sometimes you beg. Other times you try to look pitiful enough that someone might take pity on you voluntarily. A few do. You remember a kind woman in a green shawl who gave you a lump of cheese. You also remember the man who caught you trying to pick a turnip from his garden and broke 2 of your fingers with a stick. You never figured out whether he was more upset about the theft or the fact that your presence meant his yard now needed sanctifying. As the group drags itself forward, village after village starts responding the same way. Like you're a travelling infestation. They send out lookouts ahead of time. Some ring church bells as a warning. Others send messages to neighbouring towns, giving them time to prepare for your arrival by locking up food stores and arming the militia. You've seen grown men hold pikes at a 12-year-old girl until she dropped a handful of stolen onions. You've seen boys whipped until their backs opened up, just for asking for water too close to someone's well. You'd like to believe the clergy would help. After all, this is supposed to be a holy mission, isn't it? A march of the faithful. But the local priests seem less inspired by your spiritual dedication and more horrified by your physical presence. They give sermons, yes, long, scolding ones about sin, penance, and obedience. They'll offer prayers for your souls at a safe distance, but when it comes to offering bread or shelter, suddenly their hands are tied. God helps those who help themselves, they say, and you've clearly done a poor job of that. Every so often, a particularly inspired preacher will come out and try to guide your group. He'll walk alongside you for a mile or two, waving his arms and quoting scripture until he realises that no one's listening and someone just stole his coin purse. Then he disappears back into the trees and pretends the whole thing never happened. A bishop once addressed your crowd from the steps of a church. He told you to turn back. You asked him for food. He went inside and locked the door. The lords are even less generous. You cross into their lands and they treat it like an invasion. Armed men meet you at the edge of their villages, shields raised, swords sheathed at first. Some groups are driven back with sticks, others with arrows. There's not a lot of distinction made between the ones begging and the ones stealing. You're all the same to them, a swarm of uninvited mouths, a headache in human form. And in fairness, they're not wrong. It turns out medieval hospitality has limits, despite all the stories about guest rights and holy duty and caring for the traveller. Those rules apply best when the traveller is rich, famous, or at least disease-free. When it's a single monk or a wayward nobleman, people fall over themselves to offer haylofts and boiled cabbage. But when it's 1,000 scab-covered children tracking filth through the fields, suddenly everyone remembers they're out of extra food and their stables are mysteriously full. You learn to avoid eye contact. You learn to move quickly when the guards approach. You learn that the safest place to sleep is wherever the locals aren't. Forest edges, dry riverbeds, abandoned barns, anywhere that doesn't belong to someone who might be inclined to chase you off with a hoe. You stop asking. You just wait until nightfall and take what you need when no one's looking. You tell yourself it isn't theft, it's survival. You stop feeling guilty around the third beating. Rumours start to follow your group, that you're cursed, that you bring disease, that you worship false saints or eat the dead. You don't. Probably. But you understand why people think that. You've seen what your friends look like now. Sunken eyes, open sores, rag-wrapped limbs that drag through the dust like broken tools. You've smelled what the group smells like. You've heard the prayers turn to groans. The groans turn to silence. You wouldn't let you in either. You start travelling at night when you can. Fewer people watching. Fewer windows slamming shut. It doesn't stop the hunger, but at least it spares you the shame of watching yet another village pretend not to hear your stomach growl. You keep moving, always moving. Not toward Jerusalem anymore, just away from wherever you just got chased out of. And still the crowd drags on, smaller than it was, but still enough to block a road and terrify a town, still enough to remind everyone that you're coming, whether they like it or not. You are not a holy army. You are not pilgrims. You are a warning, a walking lesson in what happens when hope outruns reason. And no one opens the door. If you were one of the German children, you hit the Alps. If you were French, you just heard stories about them, or maybe envied the ones who died in them. The Alps are beautiful. Towering peaks wrapped in mist, jagged cliffs rising like broken teeth, snow that glitters under the sun like powdered glass. You've never seen anything like them before. For a brief moment, they almost feel holy, massive and indifferent, like something God carved out for his own amusement. And then you start climbing, and you realise that beauty is just another word for hostile terrain that doesn't care if you live or die. There's no path, not really, just rough switchbacks worn into the rock by goats and madmen. You slip within the first hour. Everyone does. Loose gravel, thin air and frozen mud make for bad footing, especially when your shoes gave up 3 towns ago. You try to keep up with the crowd, but the crowd is just as lost as you are. Some walk with their heads down, others crawl. The ones who stop even for a moment start to freeze. You weren't prepared for cold like this. Most of you brought cloaks, but they're the kind made for drizzle and wind, not snow and thin air. The temperature drops the higher you go, until your breath becomes a permanent fixture in front of your face, and your hands stop doing what you tell them. You shove them under your armpits. You sit on them. You beat them against your legs. Nothing works. They go white first, then purple, then black in spots. That's when the skin cracks open and starts to stink. Frostbite doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, like sleep. First your fingers tingle, then they go numb. Then they stop being fingers and start being liabilities, useless lumps that hurt more when you try to use them. One girl tries to rub life back into her toes and peels off half her skin. A boy loses 3 fingers before anyone notices he's even hurt. Someone else tries to bite through a blackened thumb just to make it stop pulsing. He doesn't succeed. And the air. You don't think air can go thin until it does. Breathing becomes a conscious effort. Your chest aches, your head pounds. Some kids collapse just trying to draw breath. Others start hallucinating. One boy says he sees angels dancing on the mountaintop, calling him upward. He walks off the edge of a cliff. No one follows. Not out of caution, just exhaustion. You've stopped reacting to screams. You hear one and you just keep walking. There's no food. Of course there's no food. Nothing grows this high up. And the villages you passed at the base didn't exactly send you off with packed lunches. You gnaw on leather bark cloth. Someone cooks snow with pine needles and calls it soup. It tastes like regret. The only thing in abundance is snow, and snow doesn't fill your stomach. It just chills it from the inside out. You lose people by the hour. They vanish behind trees or rocks, or they sit down just to rest and don't get back up. No one has the strength to carry the dead, and even if they did, there's nowhere to put them. You leave bodies half buried in snowbanks, faces frozen in confusion, or terror, or peace. The animals come later. Foxes, birds, things with teeth you don't want to identify. You see one body picked clean, except for the boots. The boots were too frozen to bother with. It turns out the mountains are better at killing children than any army. No need for swords, just time, cold, altitude, gravity. The Muslims you were supposed to be liberating Jerusalem from. They wouldn't even need to fight. They could just hand you a map to the Alps and wait for nature to do the work. You start to think that maybe the mountains were the real test all along. Not of faith, but of physics. And physics is winning. Some of the older kids try to keep order. They shout instructions, lead chants, try to rally the group with talk of glory and God. It doesn't work. Their voices crack in the cold. Their feet bleed through their wrappings. They stop shouting after a while. You wonder if anyone still believes you're going to make it to Jerusalem, let alone walk there across the sea. The only thing you're likely to cross is the line between frostbite and full-body shutdown. At night, you sleep in caves or beneath outcroppings, huddled so close to each other that you can't tell where one body ends and another begins. The snow comes down in thick, silent sheets. It covers everything. The ground, the packs, the bodies, the memories. When you wake up, it's hard to tell who's alive and who's just cold enough to pass for it. You poke the person next to you and hope they twitch. Eventually, the slope begins to descend again. Some say it's a sign, others just groan. A few cry, but not for joy, more like relief that the dying might slow down. The survivors are fewer now, quieter. The march continues, but it's not a crusade anymore. It's a procession of ghosts. Hollow-eyed, frost-bitten, half-starved ghosts shuffling down the spine of a mountain that never cared they were there in the first place. And the mountains don't wave goodbye. They don't even notice you're leaving. The good news is you make it to the sea. The bad news is it's still there. It doesn't part. It doesn't tremble. It doesn't so much as ripple politely in your direction. It just sits there, the Mediterranean, vast and blue, and utterly unimpressed by the thousands of barefoot children now lined up along its edge. You stare at it for a long time, waiting for something to happen. Someone mutters a prayer. Another dips their toe in and recoils at the cold. A third raises a wooden cross like, maybe the water will see it and change its mind. It doesn't. The sea remains exactly what it's always been, wet, enormous, and completely indifferent to your expectations. This was supposed to be the moment, the divine reveal, the miracle that justified all the walking, the hunger, the dead friends, and frozen fingers and prayers that went nowhere. The plan, such as it was, always hinged on this, that the sea would split like it did for Moses, and that you, a group of half-starved peasant children, would march heroically across the ocean floor to the Holy Land, while angels applauded from the shoreline. But now that you're here, reality has the audacity to act like reality, and the silence is louder than any sermon. You're not the only one who's confused. Around you, the survivors slump to the ground, sunburned and half-conscious. Some try to pray louder, as if volume might convince God to reconsider. Others just sit and stare at the waves like they're trying to negotiate. You hear someone mutter that maybe they're at the wrong sea. Another suggests they wait until the tide goes out. Someone else insists that the miracle is coming, just not yet. That faith means patience and that you'll be punished if you stop believing now. No one has the energy to argue or to care. There's no plan, no leadership, no food. You're at Marseille or maybe Genoa. It depends which path you took, which preacher you followed, and which plague-ridden chunk of dirt you managed to survive, long enough to stagger across. But the destination doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you've run out of road, and the sea has no intention of making room. You were told this moment would be triumphant, that the heavens would open, that the adults would marvel. Instead, they mostly just want you gone. The townsfolk here don't look at you like pilgrims. They look at you like a pest problem. You're not a miracle. You're a mess. You're lice and filth and disease in human form, and you've shown up at their docks with nothing but cracked heels and entitlement. Some townspeople try to chase you away outright. Others just ignore you and hope starvation does the job. The local clergy, ever helpful, offer some vague platitudes about God's mysterious timing. A few even suggest maybe the miracle already happened and you simply missed it. Maybe the survival was the miracle. Maybe reaching the sea was all God wanted from you. They don't offer food, of course, just ideas, and even those are getting harder to swallow. Rumours swirl through the crowd like flies. Some say ships are coming. Others claim they've already spoken to a merchant who promised safe passage to Jerusalem. A few claim to have seen angels at sunrise. One boy insists the sea did part earlier, but you all weren't worthy yet, so it closed again. You don't believe any of it, but disbelief isn't the same as knowing what to do next. You try begging. Some locals drop coins in your hand without making eye contact. Others hurl scraps from windows and shout at you to move along. A guard kicks over your water jar just for standing too close to his post. A woman spits when you ask for bread. A merchant threatens to call the watch when your friend collapses near his stall. You're not welcome here, and no one pretends otherwise. So you sit and wait and rot in the sun with everyone else. Your skin blisters, your lips crack. You try drinking seawater once and immediately regret it. Some of the others start wandering the docks, hoping for a ship. Any ship. Maybe one will take pity. Maybe one will take money, if anyone had any. Maybe one will take children. You're not sure what that means yet, but you'll find out soon enough. For now, you just sit and watch the waves. They roll in. They roll out. They do not part. And in that moment, surrounded by the broken, the starving, and the furious, you realise the truth no one said out loud. The sea was never going to move. It was never supposed to. There was no miracle coming. No divine bridge to the Holy Land. Just a vast, endless barrier. One that's been here longer than your prayers, and that will outlast your bones. And still, some kids are praying. Some kids still believe. You don't have the heart to stop them. But you stop looking at the water. You've seen enough. Just when hope is at its thinnest, it happens. Two men arrive at the docks, dressed in fine robes that shimmer a little too much for the setting. Their hands are soft, their teeth clean, and their shoes don't appear to have walked a single mile. They look like they've never been hungry in their lives, which in your current state makes them look like saints, or gods, or something close enough to believe in. They smile. That's the first warning, though you don't realise it yet. Big, wide, confident smiles with all their teeth showing. The kind of smile that always means someone else is going to pay. They say they've heard your story, that your struggle has moved them, that they've been called to help. They say they're merchants, yes, but good Christian men, and they just happen to have a fleet of ships, big ones, beautiful ones, and they are willing, out of the kindness of their very Christian hearts, to take you to Jerusalem. For free. You should be suspicious. You're not. You've survived 1,000 miles on nothing but dried out faith and blistered feet. And here are two men with clean fingernails and answers. It feels divine. It feels like the miracle finally arrived. Just fashionably late and slightly overdressed. Some of the other children cry when they hear the offer. Some fall to their knees and cross themselves, thanking God for sending deliverance in the form of silk robes and fancy shoes. You don't ask whether ships are docked. You don't ask who owns them. You don't ask how two merchants plan to feed and transport thousands of starving children across the sea at their own expense. All you hear is Jerusalem, and your brain shuts off. After everything, the dead friends, the cold, the hunger, the sea that didn't split, here at last is a way forward. And that's all you want. Forward. The men speak with authority. They gesture like they're used to being listened to. They use words like logistics and arrangements, though no one understands what those mean. But they say them with enough confidence that you assume someone has thought this through. A few adults in the crowd raise concerns, low murmurs about legitimacy and God's timing, and maybe waiting for a proper blessing. But they're ignored. At this point, anyone raising objections sounds like a heretic, or worse, like a coward. The boarding begins within days. The ships arrive one morning, anchored just offshore. Sleek, foreign-looking vessels that creak ominously but float well enough to inspire faith. The children are herded toward the docks in clusters, their possessions bundled into sacks, their faces lit with exhausted hope. You watch as they load onto the ships in tight lines, stumbling up gangplanks that smell of salt and tar and something less wholesome beneath. You go too, of course you do. You're not about to stay behind and rot, while everyone else sails towards salvation. The merchants welcome each child aboard like it's a family reunion. They pat heads, they clap shoulders. They tell you that the journey won't take long, that Jerusalem is closer than you think, and that God rewards those who endure. You try not to wonder why they're grinning quite so much. You don't know that you'll never see Jerusalem. You don't know that the ships are headed south, not east, toward the North African coast, where buyers are already waiting. You don't know that the free passage is actually a transaction, and that you are the product. You don't know that 5 of the 7 ships won't even make it, wrecked in storms with all hands lost. You only know that for the first time in weeks, you are sitting, not walking. And that's enough. You're crammed into the hold, packed in tight with the others. The air below deck is thick, damp with sweat and bile, and whatever's leaking from the barrels nearby. There's little light, less water, and no room to lie down. A few kids ask when you'll set sail. A few others ask if there'll be food soon. No one answers. The merchants are no longer smiling. They're shouting now. Orders in a language you don't speak to sailors, with eyes that don't meet yours. There's still time to be afraid. You just haven't reached it yet. Right now, you're tired, hopeful, and slightly seasick. You tell yourself this is fine. You tell yourself that God works in mysterious ways. That maybe the ship sailing west before they turn south is just a detour. That maybe this strange silence is reverence, not warning. That maybe you're not being sold, just delivered. But somewhere deep down, a voice in the back of your mind whispers what you don't want to hear. Merchants don't smile like that unless they're getting paid. And you're the payment. The first storm doesn't wait long. You've barely grown used to the swaying when the sky darkens and the wind shifts. It starts with a low groan from the hull. The sound of old wood remembering it wasn't built for this. Then the shouting begins. Sailors scrambling across the deck, tying ropes you don't understand, yelling words you don't speak. You don't know what's happening, but the fear in their voices is louder than the waves. Below deck, it's chaos. There's no room to sit, let alone move, and the motion has gone from gentle rocking to full body lurching that throws you into the people beside you. Someone vomits, then someone else. Within minutes, the hold reeks of bile and fear, and the sharp sting of urine as kids lose control of everything. You press yourself against a damp plank wall and try not to breathe through your nose. It doesn't help. Water starts to come in, not a flood at first, but just a steady drip from somewhere above, then a spray through the boards as the waves rise. Buckets are passed around, or maybe stolen. You try to help, but it's pointless. You're not bailing out a leaky room. You're sinking with it. You pray, of course you do. So does everyone else. Children shout out names of saints, of Jesus, of mothers long dead. Some scream until their throats give out. Others go quiet, mouths open, but no sound coming. The ship tilts hard to one side, and someone falls and doesn't get up. You don't know if they're dead or unconscious. You don't check. You're too busy gripping a support beam and whispering the same 3 lines of prayer over and over, like they're going to do anything. The ship doesn't go down that night, but some of them do. You hear about it later, how 2 ships vanished in the storm, nothing left but splinters and silence. No survivors, no heroic rescues, just dozens, maybe hundreds of children swallowed whole by the sea, while their would-be saviours shouted orders from dry decks. A few bodies wash up on shore days later, bloated, unrecognisable. A sailor laughs when someone asks if the saints will guide them home. The saints don't swim, he says. Your ship makes it through that storm. But another follows, and another. Sometimes the sky's calm when you wake up, only to turn black by midday. Other times, the rain starts without warning, pounding the deck like punishment, soaking the ropes, drenching the sails, and sending sailors into frantic motion. They move like this is routine, which is somehow worse. It means they've done this before. It means they know how many don't make it. You try to stay above deck when you can. The air is foul, but it's better than the hold, where sickness spreads faster than fire. You've lost track of how many are still alive down there. You know some haven't moved in a long time. One boy you knew, small, quiet, used to hum under his breath, died sometime in the night, curled in a corner beneath a barrel. No one noticed until morning. By then the body was stiff. They tossed it overboard like a bundle of rags. You watch the sea take it, no ceremony, just a splash and then nothing. You think that's the worst part, how easy it is, how quickly a person becomes a burden, then a smell, then ballast. You stop learning names, again. You already went through this on land, but this is different. The sea doesn't let you pretend. There's no illusion of burial, no pretending someone just fell behind. When they go overboard, they're gone. Completely. Eaten by something you can't see and don't want to imagine. Eventually, the storm season gives way to calmer water. The sky clears. The sea flattens out. The heat comes next, brutal and airless. You bake on the deck during the day and freeze under soaked blankets at night. Food is a handful of something that might have once been grain. Water is warm and tastes like it's been thinking about rot for several days. You drink it anyway. When land appears, it's not Jerusalem. It's not the Holy Land. It's not anything anyone promised. You don't know where you are, but the men in charge seem satisfied. That alone is a bad sign. They gather you on deck. They say this is a temporary stop. They say you'll be unloaded, sorted, sheltered, fed. You believe them because you're too tired not to, and because the alternative, that this is the end of the road and not the beginning, is too awful to face just yet. So you go ashore, some limping, some carried, some too dazed to move without being dragged. You walk down the plank onto hot sand with a dozen other skeletons in children's skin. You don't know what's coming. You don't know what you've already lost, but the sea, at least, is behind you now. And it is very good at keeping secrets. The chains go on quickly, no ceremony, no explanation. Just rough hands, a shove in the back, and then iron around your wrists like it belongs there. Some of the others protest, weak, breathless protests from children too sunburned and sick to put up a real fight. One boy screams for his mother until he's gagged. A girl bites one of the guards and gets struck across the mouth hard enough to knock loose a tooth. You don't scream. You just watch as the lock clicks into place, still wearing the little wooden cross you carved back when you thought this was about faith. You're in North Africa. You don't know the name of the port. Maybe it's Tunis, maybe Algiers, maybe somewhere smaller and less lucky. The heat is crushing, but it's not the worst thing. The worst thing is how efficient this all feels. Like it's been done before. Like there's a system. You're herded off the boat in groups, sorted, counted, lined up, prodded like livestock. No one tells you where you are. No one tells you why this is happening. But deep down, you already know. There are buyers waiting. Some in long robes, others in tunics dyed in colours you've never seen before. Their shoes are polished, their voices calm. They walk the rows slowly, examining you like you're not people but property. They check teeth, pinch arms, squint at scabs. A few kids are turned away, too sick, too thin. One collapses during inspection and is dragged away without a word. You never see him again. You were told this was a crusade, that you were going to walk across the sea and reclaim the Holy Land in the name of God, that angels would guide you and that your suffering would be redeemed. Instead, you're standing on foreign soil in a foreign market, being sold by the very men who smiled and said they were here to help. If there's a lesson here, you don't want to learn it. The process is quick. A name you don't understand is called money changes hands, and someone grabs your chain and leads you away. Some children cry out for their friends. Others go silent, eyes glazed. A few resist and are beaten until they stop. The group fractures into pieces. You never see most of them again. Not because they've gone far, yet you suspect many of them are within shouting distance, but because shouting won't save anyone now. You don't know the name of the man who buys you. He doesn't tell you. He doesn't speak your language, and you don't speak his. You learn his moods instead, the sharpness in his movements when he's angry, the silence that means he's watching. You're brought to a home that looks nothing like the huts you grew up in. The walls are made of stone, the windows arched and shuttered. You sleep in a corner on a mat that smells like mildew. It's still better than the boat. You don't do much at first, you're too weak. Eventually, they put you to work, cleaning, carrying, standing still for hours. When you move too slowly, you're struck. When you ask questions, you're ignored. When you pray, they don't stop you. They just watch. You keep the cross around your neck because it's the only thing left of the old life. But even that starts to feel hollow. You wore it during the beatings. You wore it on the ship. You wore it when they shackled your wrists. If it was meant to protect you, it failed. Some of the children die, not dramatically, just gradually. One day they're coughing, the next they're not. Some are worked to death, some are neglected until their bodies shut down, others simply lose the will to keep moving. You wonder if that will happen to you. You're not sure if you're afraid of it or hoping for it. Most days you feel like you've already disappeared. Not everyone dies. Some live, if you can call it that. They grow older, quieter. They learn enough of the language to follow orders. They forget the songs they used to sing, the villages they came from, the reason they marched to the sea in the first place. One boy you recognise from the ship no longer responds to his name. You're not sure if he's pretending or if he truly forgot. You don't ask. You haven't spoken aloud in days. Years from now, if you live that long, someone might mention the Children's Crusade. They'll call it a tragedy, a footnote in the chronicles, an example of misguided faith. They won't know your name. They won't know where you ended up. They'll assume you died quickly, and maybe that would have been kinder. But you didn't die quickly. You were sold, you were used, and you were forgotten. This is not a holy pilgrimage. It's a slow, suffocating theft of your life, your name, your purpose, and the saints still haven't said a word. Not everyone makes it to the sea. That part of the story usually gets left out. The tales people tell later, the ones recited in monasteries or scribbled by half-interested chroniclers, skip over the thousands who never even got close. It's easier to talk about ships and storms and betrayal than to explain the children who simply disappeared somewhere along the way, one village at a time. Some of them turn back. You're told that's cowardice, but really it's survival dressed in shame. They slip away in the night, barefoot and broken, heading in the direction they think home might still be. You never hear from them again. Maybe they make it. Maybe they die under a hedge. One more body the locals pretend not to notice. Either way, they vanish without a trace, which is more mercy than most of you will get. Others just wander. Not toward the sea, not toward Jerusalem, just forward, because it's the only thing they know how to do. They stagger from one field to the next, begging when they can, stealing when they must, dodging guards, dogs, and disease. They die in forests, along roadside ditches, in barns too cold to offer real shelter. A few stay in villages that let them, taken in out of pity or guilt, or fear of God. But most are turned away. Some of those villages will later insist they never saw any crusading children at all. You think about them sometimes, the ones who peeled off from the main group and just kept walking, hoping something better lay over the next hill. They probably thought they'd find another band of pilgrims, another miracle, another sermon that made everything make sense again. But there was nothing. Just empty roads and empty stomachs and the slow, quiet disintegration of whatever purpose they thought they had. There are no records, no scrolls with names, no ledgers tracking who left and who arrived. No census of the dead. These weren't knights with crests or noblemen with titles. These were peasants, orphans, servants' sons, milkmaids, shepherd girls. No one was writing their stories down. No one thought they'd matter in the long run. And so, when they collapsed beside a stone wall or fell face first into a puddle too shallow to drown in, they simply ceased to exist in the eyes of history. Even now, historians aren't sure how many children set out. 10,000? 20? Some say as many as 30,000. It doesn't matter. No one kept count, and by the end, no one wanted to. The numbers blur, shift, contradict themselves. That's the thing about mass failure. It's hard to pin down, especially when the dead don't leave tombstones, especially when no one bothered to ask their names in the first place. You think about the fields they might be buried in, or not buried in, just bones under weeds, pressed flat by centuries of indifference. Someone's farm now, someone's grazing land, crops grown in soil that once held starving children. There's probably a stone or two that used to be part of a roadside shrine. Someone's great-grandfather might remember hearing that a boy died near the old tree at the edge of the pasture. No one ever finds the body. Just a story, barely repeated, mostly ignored. There are no monuments, no markers, no stained glass windows in cathedrals depicting the children who didn't make it. Just silence, maybe a single sentence in a dusty manuscript about how many perished along the road. That's it. That's all you get. After everything. After the walking, the hunger, the prayers. After you watched your friends die beside you. After your feet bled and your belly shrank and your voice gave out from begging. You get a footnote. And if someone were to walk that same road today, if they followed the old paths, traced the lines on a map, stopped in the same villages, they'd see nothing. No bones, no crosses, no plaque that says, "Here lay the forgotten," just wildflowers, fences, a few stones blackened with moss and time. The land has swallowed what the world didn't care to remember. You wonder how many of them made it a few more miles before collapsing. How many thought they were close. How many saw the sea and dropped just short of it. No headlines, no final prayers, just dirt and sky and the sound of feet that didn't stop soon enough. In modern terms, they'd be called unaccounted for, discarded entries in someone else's logistics, lost children, runaways, strays. If it happened today, maybe they'd get a missing person report, a poster, a news cycle, but back then they were just burdens that removed themselves from the equation, and so the march never really ended. It just faded, fragmented, thinned out like breath on a cold morning. Until one day someone looked around and realised that most of the people they started with were gone. And no one asked where, because no one wanted to know. You were never coming home. Not really, maybe you believed it at the start, that this was a round trip, that you'd return with stories and blessings and a shiny new connection to heaven. Maybe you even pictured it, arriving back in your village sun-kissed and taller, holding a relic in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other, the prodigal child made holy. But none of that was ever going to happen. You just didn't know it yet. No one remembers your name. Not the monks who wrote about the Crusade years later. They didn't care about names. They cared about numbers, and even then they got those wrong. Not the priests who sent you off with prayers they didn't mean. Not the merchants who sold you like salted meat. Not even the other children, most of whom forgot your name long before you vanished. And certainly not the parents who let you go, if they even noticed you were gone. That's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Your absence wasn't a tragedy. It was a relief. One less mouth to feed. One less body to bury. One less problem for a family already drowning in its own failures. When you left, no bells rang. No records were taken. No search parties formed. And when you didn't come back, the world moved on without a pause. They might have told themselves a story. That you made it to Jerusalem. That you died bravely. That you were chosen. But deep down, they probably knew better. They knew what kind of child walks hundreds of miles without shoes, food, or protection. They knew the road didn't lead to a miracle. It led to somewhere far away and much quieter. You started as a follower of a preacher boy with too much confidence and too few answers, of a crowd that moved faster than your thoughts, of a dream that wasn't yours but felt better than the nightmare you were born into. You were told that faith would guide you, that your suffering would mean something, that you were part of a movement. But movements require momentum, and yours ran out long before your feet did. Along the way, you lost everything that made you a person. Your name, your story, your history. You stopped being someone's child. You became part of a group. Then a body, then a number, then nothing. You were a set of footprints on a road no one wanted to follow, a stomach no one could fill, a mouth no one had time to listen to. And what did it all amount to? Let's recap, shall we? You were recruited, not by trained clerics or respected nobles, but by a boy with a vision and a crowd control problem. You walked hundreds of miles based on a plan that could be summarised in 3 words. God will help. You were promised a sea that would split, a holy land that would welcome you, and a story that would make sense someday. Instead, the sea remained a sea. The Holy Land never came, and the story doesn't make sense, not even now. Congratulations. You followed faith to its natural conclusion. Hunger, betrayal, slavery, and silence. You believed hard enough to lose everything, and you weren't even worth a martyrdom. Just one more child in a long line of others who were equally disposable and equally forgotten. You weren't chosen, you were convenient. You died, somewhere, somehow. Maybe in a ditch outside a village that didn't want you. Maybe at sea, your lungs full of salt and panic. Maybe in a slave market, alone and watching the sky for signs that never came. Or maybe you lived, a little, long enough to forget why you left in the first place. Long enough to forget what home looked like. Long enough to become someone else's servant, or property, or memory. And for what? There's no plaque with your name on it. No memorial carved in marble. No hymn sung for the thousands of you who never came back. There's just a line in a history book, written centuries later by someone who didn't even bother to get the numbers right. A story told to make a point about youthful zeal or spiritual error. A cautionary tale. Or worse, an anecdote. But here, in this moment, someone remembers. Someone tells your story. And maybe that's the closest thing to justice you'll ever get. Not redemption, not recognition, just a voice saying the truth out loud in a world that was never interested in hearing it. You were never coming home, and the world never planned to welcome you back if you did. You died for nothing. No land was reclaimed, no banner was raised, no heavenly gates opened to welcome your sacrifice. There was no final act of glory, no triumphant return, no moment where it all suddenly made sense. You just stopped. Whether it was on the road, in the sea, in a stranger's home, or beneath a sky you didn't recognize, your story ended quietly. Without applause, without witnesses. And yet, in some small, cruel way, that was always the plan. History is written by the powerful, but it's built on the bones of people like you. The forgotten, the nameless, the ones who were sent off into the world with nothing but promises and came back as silence. You weren't important enough to be remembered properly, not noble enough to be mourned, not lucky enough to leave a mark. You were a peasant, one of thousands, young, poor, expendable. You followed a boy who said God was speaking through him, because in your world, hope dressed as madness still looked better than despair in rags. You walked until you bled, starved until you begged, prayed until your voice gave out, and no one came. No saint, no miracle, no salvation, just gravity, weather, hunger, and time. But now it's over. The road, the sea, the lies. You don't have to walk anymore. You don't have to believe anymore. You don't have to survive something that never cared whether you did. Whatever waited for you at the end, be it peace or nothing at all, at least it isn't more of this. So sleep now, Crusader. Not as a martyr, not as a hero, just as someone who tried and paid for it. You were never the point of the story. You were never going to win. You were just a peasant, and you never came home. That brings us to the end of tonight's slow, sun-scorched march into a tragedy that never needed warriors, just hungry children, hollow promises, and enough silence to bury them in. If you're still awake, thank you for wandering through this forgotten corner of history with me. If you'd like early access to more softly narrated history, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about where you'd have turned back. At the preacher's first speech, the first blister, or not at all. Sleep well.